Going live again very soon. Live streaming is on.
Okay.
But we don't know what
So-
stopped it, right?
We don't know what stopped it. Carry on.
Carry on.
And
Same
Right.
bad time, same bad place.
it's still on the
Just
same.
when I was starting to talk shit, it's right. So now we use the Jitsi link, or what? What do we use?
No, you use a YouTube link. It should be live on YouTube again.
Yeah.
Excellent connection. And that's
Excellent.
the link you share now.
No, that's not, is it?
So full screen, and then you have share somewhere here.
Edit.
Just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Share.
It shames me that I don't know anything about this. Honestly, I mean, I'm
You're hopeless.
bloody hopeless. Yeah.
Where is share? Make my life easy, damn it, YouTube. I don't need you to full screen it. I need you to share this to somewhere. Here. Damn it. Okay, send the link around again. Send this around.
Assalamu alaikum. Now we have to wait for it to work.
It's working already.
Okay, but I need you to get off the screen.
I'm not on the screen anymore. I'm gone. I'm disappeared. I'm extinct. Send me the link.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But can you also post the link on your own website, because on your own Facebook, because I couldn't find it.
I'm putting it on Facebook as we speak. Wow. Okay. I think much of what is to be done has been done. Johannes, would you do me the favor of
Introducing you. Of reintroducing us.
not at all. Let's continue with the conversation.
So, where were we? We were just in the current situation with cronyism in the government in the time after 91.
Yeah. So now we're talking 91 to 2005, one way or another of system of governance on the legitimacy, depending on the certain institutions. It's not just an Ethiopian example, but an example of certain African countries where elections are held, parliaments are in session, but much of what they do is rubber stamping what's being told from, let's say, a central committee of a party, which has a communistic tune to it, or a convention of a party. A party decides what its manifesto is going to be, and a certain group rubber stamps it, then it goes to parliament and it's rubber stamped again. And it continued this way with not much of a political space from, let's say, 2000 to 2005, where the first freer and far more open elections were held. And on that election, they saw how, while they have much of the rural community at their hands, the elite public that lives in cities does not have a heart for them. They're not liked very much. And that election was the one that showed a different set of political priorities and a different set of political commitment to political action that the average city dweller or elite had, as opposed to what the PRDF thought they had.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I mean, they still, they wanted to get the average urban population. They started doing condominium houses or low-cost cheap houses to alleviate some of the shortages. I believe a lot of German technical institutions were involved as well. Mm. And we go back to, again, even though such things are being done, these are done in a top-down manner where feedback is not being received. And within this party, you find critical elements, like I consider the Marxian elements of trying to pretend to be the righteous inheritor of history, and therefore you cannot be questioned. And when they are questioned, you're questioned. What they have something called democratic centralism, where much of the fault, if it is, should be described and should be exorcised like a sin in a meeting of 15 or 17 or 20 people, what have you, of those people who run an entire country. Therefore, what they implement as a policy on the ground, how it's implemented, what are the feedbacks from such policies, what problems are they causing, what suppression, what oppression, what is this crony capitalism, how much of it is going to the elites themselves, eventually caught up with them. So within the ruling coalition of four parties, the legitimacy of the one running it was questioned because it was in charge of a corrupt, inefficient system, and it claimed legitimacy to power by developing the country for 11%, which really doesn't mean anything to the average person. And so the Kero movement, the movement in Oromia of an opposition movement with regards to how the country is run. First is our land is being taken away without legitimate, political power that should be given to them. Second is, if you think about it, in a country this big, 120 million people, about 50 million of them happen to be Oromos. And they consider themselves disenfranchised by the system with little enfranchisement in terms of maneuvering of city power, administrative power, or political power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just this was just my next question. How much does the question of ethnicity or belonging to some ethnicity played in there? Because also if we look at the map of Ethiopia, so after 91, the country was divided into those kind of ethnic areas, which were then the new districts. So, and Addis Abeba is in the center of kind of this really biggest chunk, which is Oromo district. And so while the country traditionally, as I understood it, was more ruled by the Amhara and the Tigray people. So how much, and while the Oromo are actually the biggest part of the population, and now Abiy Ahmed is also from an Oromo background, and how much do these play into this, or how much are they also just kind of instrumentalized?
Jess, would you
This-
like to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sort of ethnic question sort of came up because PM Abiy Ahmed is not only from an Oromo background, but he's also Pentecostal by belief. And so that plays a difference, and that makes that could possibly also give it like a position of empowerment and change and readiness for the multi-ethnic ruling of a nation. And yeah, but however, I don't feel equipped enough to comment on the on the context of ethnicity. I just feel like it's maybe also a moment to recognize that it's a multi-ethnic mega nation which consists of around 80 ethnic groups. And so the sort of current struggle that we are witnessing, that is visible, is just one, more or less, of very complex excavation that is happening at the moment, because there has been also a massacre in Beshangul, and Amharas are being currently chased and purged from. And so the sort of like struggles currently are on many, many, many more fronts as well. They are not just that visible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are interesting observations to be made here. First, the revolution in 2016, 17, 18 that led to the ascendancy of Prime Minister Abiy was not so much as a revolution but a reshuffle, because one group having leverage of power eventually gave up to two other groups which are tactically allied, which is the Amara and the Oromo. They even have a name for it, Oromara. But apart from a tactical alliance, it's not strategic in its nature. And second is 80% of the party cadres that used to represent what was this grand coalition, the APRDF, are still in charge and are still in the game. So from this 80% of people in charge, a reshuffle in this cabinet, and Abiy's vision, which is that even though coming from an Oromo ethnic group and representing the biggest bloc now, his visions of having a one unified party, in other words, one party divided into 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 versions, yeah, with him as the head, and you can, as a head or an idea creator, a conscience, you name it. He's the strategy maker, the policy writer, and the rest of them accepting it is what the before ethnically demarcated constitutional system is scared of. One of the most important things the APRDF came and wrote in its constitution and everywhere else was that from now on, any assumptions of power or any questions of legitimacy should be answered at the ballot box. In other words, even though they didn't write it, what they assumed was from now on, there are going to be no military juntas taking charge of the country. And any questions with regards to legitimacy or representation should be answered at the ballot box. Ironically, they have made the best in narrowing the political space, which Abiy should be credited for and opening up. And for the past 2 years, you see this unprecedented level of openness, which was wonderful, an unprecedented level of opinions, right and left and center, being heard, from the very liberal to the very fanaticist being expressed. But eventually, what has happened is a growing level of incompetence started to be seen, you see. And this incompetence arises from nobody knowing who is in charge, not just at the government level, but what affiliation one should have to have the legitimacy of running state power. So the people dying in Oromia, the Amharas, right? If it is a system that requires legitimacy, the legitimacy happens in ethnic lines, then the next question should have been the very question of minorities living in these majority areas. In other words, it's estimated, I have not verified this, but close to 10 million people live in Oromia. And these 10 million people, although from very different backgrounds and ethnic groups, the majority of them happen to be Amhara. And there have always been this clash between one being in charge of a clearly ethnically demarcated line or a state with its own ethnic group, language, culture, and experience. We never discussed this question of what are the roles of the minorities within these regions. In other words, in a state, what rules, laws, and governance should be there for these minorities? Should be ruled by the majority, or should they have a specific discretion when power is exercised? That has clearly gone out of the window because we've heard ethnic massacres in Benishangul Gumuz, which is the southwestern part of this region or a state in the southwest, in Oromia several times now.
So it's far away from Tigray.
Yeah, it's 600, 700, 800 kilometers. And this sort of eroded the legitimacy and the power Abiy had in running a federal state. And then came this very interesting idea. Now what you see is a clear battle line or a political battle line has been drawn by those who want the ethnically federated administration to continue versus those who want this country to go not in terms of the constitutionally mandated way, which is the first enfranchisement to blocks and then to the individual, reversed, so that we would become a liberal democracy where the right of an individual should be the first and foremost to be respected, not the groups, based on ethnic groups.
Mm-hmm.
So it was my hope that there was going to be an election this year, and it was everybody's hope that Abiy's job at the moment was to lead this transformation until election. In other words, to make sure that elections are not the first thing to be done, but the opening of a political space, a legitimate group of people running electoral offices and boards, so that you have a clear electoral process could take place, voting that is not rigged and legitimate, and once and for all, a democratically elected government to take charge of the country post October 2020, or so was the plan.
But then Abiy Ahmed would have been also kind of a possibility for election or to.
Well, he would have overwhelmingly won the election had he stayed the course and be part of, as I've told you, what happened in the past in 2018 when he ascended to power was he was in charge of a party which was in charge of the largest ethnic group. Therefore, undoubtedly, he would have had enough political power to win it outright. But within a year, he started changing things, you see. What he did was from going from this ethnically based bloc rights group and political party, he decided a unitary system is better. That was considered a bit of a betrayal to the group that got him to power. And that openness led to some resentments. I have told you about how minorities were treated in minority-majority states. And this eventually led to the reversal of fortune of those who were sent to Tigray as well, the TPLF. So the TPLF started the conversation of telling the story that Abiy is there to complement the process of clearly demarcated electoral process that will lead to those who will be elected in the next cycle, and all political decisions to be made later. In other words, Abiy being looked at a transitional candidate, and should he win the election, being the next de facto head of state. The calculus changed to Abiy also being now part of the Unitarian faction, while the OPDO and everybody else being the factions that advocate for ethnic federalism. And this battle line would have gone to an election where the decision would have been made if the election were held at the time. Now, two things changed. Abiy now is part of the Unitarian system. He has one party, a single party divided in 7 versions. The coronavirus has made, well, the coronavirus was used as a reason, but I'm not sure it would have sufficed. Elections have been held in other countries, so we could have done it. But this was seized by the TPLF, and the TPLF said there is a usurpation of power by Abiy and his comrades, and the country is going through an unconstitutional manner to a unitarian system, in essence, making Abiy the dictator.
Mhm.
So when the federation, the House of Federation, as we call in Ethiopia, which has the constitutional mandate to interpret the constitution. So it's not like the United States or Germany, where when there are constitutional disputes, the Supreme Court is not the one to decide it. In Ethiopia, there is a House of Federation whose job it is to interpret what the constitution means. So one thing that was said was, we're going to have elections every 5 years. Now, 5 years was up, but we couldn't hold elections because Corona happened, a pandemic.
Mhm.
What is to be done? The federation said, well, we're going to have to wait until this pandemic is over, and only after it's over in 12 months after should we have the elections. This was not accepted by the TPLF. It considered it as a useful power grab, and it went on with elections anyway. And they went elections. For preparations to hold elections within Tigray. In other words, since they are ethnic states with the right of self-governance, we have our rights to elect our leaders, is what they said. So they held elections. There were 4 parties or 5 parties involved. My guess is they won it 90-something% outright. Ironically, this is a party that was hated by the time it went back to where it went from, which is that 27 years later, they went back to find that they were hated in Tigray as well, because much of the work they've done is for everything else, and Tigray looked the same as it looked 30 years ago. So they lost much of the public confidence. They apologized. And ironically enough, in a remarkable turn of events, and this is my opinion, they slowly but surely gained that popular support that they completely lost. Meanwhile, in Addis,
Sorry, how did they gain it? I mean, after
by essentially going and confessing, there is some cathartic element to it. They essentially said, we have fucked up, or we have messed up, and we are going to do better. That was their answer to society asking them why they have not done anything in the past 30 years.
And I think it's also important to know that they've also established a regional broadcasting show or TV channel. So the usage of media also played a very important information in getting a certain kind of narrative out there, which made mobilizing over 200,000 paramilitia not that difficult at some point.
Yeah. But essentially, they're there in the arm of going back to the society that admonished them and then saying, we would be the only legitimate power to stay here because we are now having enemies of the central government. In other words, they made the political conversation about how they've come back. And even though they come back according to the constitutional and party rules of the EPRDF, there was no longer a EPRDF a year later. They've left it, and they said the party that is in charge of Ethiopia at the moment is undemocratic, dictatorial, and unconstitutional. And come elections, we're going to fight for our right. Elections were cancelled. It gave them a way through to tell to the public, the Tigrayan public, that these people will do anything to stay in power, Corona notwithstanding. And therefore, the only way that we have to do is to defend ourselves. So they held elections, maintained state power, and I mean the Tigray state power.
But you said was like 90%.
Yeah.
So, but basically, this sounds like a rigged election, or nobody gets.
Well, interestingly enough, I don't know. Like, if it is free and fair elections, I have not received any message about that. But 90% doesn't. Well, here's also the thing. It is part of the global. There are certain global trends at force here as well. What I find interesting is you will also find the rural-urban divisions here as well. In Tigray, the rural, if you listen to the one who has Facebook and all platforms, and there's this that you are very close to, what you hear is the 2 or 3 other parties were equally as capable, equally as educated, equally worth of ideas, but the political space they could reach, there were 2.8 million voters, most of them living in rural areas in Tigray. Even though urbanization is catching up, urban versus rural examples still exist. So it could be that 90% of the vote they got is because of their entrenched way of party diktat that they have, to the point where 1% to 5 was an administration that they sought after.
And as Jessica just told, I mean, they had the broadcasting abilities, so
yeah, they were infinitely capable of reaching more people more consistently, and importantly, providing the message that what we're going to have in the near future is not a government, but we have to prepare ourselves for conflict, because the state or the federal government is dictatorial and it wants to destroy us. It provided this message to the public, and the public said this is no time to go about multi-party democracy. It's
so
to go about, yeah.
It was already about the nationalistic card which they played, which again,
which overwhelmingly, I think, won the vote of the day.
Which then reminds us again of Yugoslavia, where the old communist leaders kind of switched to nationalistic leaders to keep the power. Or is it? I don't know. Maybe it's true.
Well, currently the fight, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I'm admonished every time I speak of it when I say that this made a, I have heard of the conversation where state collapse, or as they describe it, is possible in Ethiopia, and I'm angrily reminded by Ethiopians that such a thing will not happen. Intimating that the fight so far is for the right to legitimately administer the Ethiopian federal government. In other words, the conversation is placed in a way that the Tigrayan federal government also wants a seat at the table which runs the country, is the whole point. So even Tigray or the TPLF is fighting to get back at that seat, is the conversation. But they don't see what is going on. And now we go to this conflict, which is that this confrontation went to the place where a war was declared, I think about the night when Trump was, the eve of the American elections, or the night before, I'm not sure which date, the federal government issued a call to arms and saying we're going to have a police action in Tigray where this illegal regime need to be thrown out for 3 reasons. 1, for holding illegal elections, which is against the constitution, for staying in power that they did not deserve and did not have right to, and for inciting violence and challenging the constitutional order of Ethiopia. So they sent militias from 2-3 different states, followed by a conventional 3, 4, 5 divisions of army, followed by, as we hear it now, a help from the Eritrean government, drones from the United Arab Emirates, I'm told. And it has become, what was supposed to be a police action now has the element of a multi-state conflict, which will not bode well for Ethiopia or for its unity.
So, I don't know, do you have any, I mean, as we hear, all the communication, ways of communication are blocked, and so there's only the accounts from refugees who fled to Sudan or to Eritrea. Have you got any news what is happening, or any, or what? Well,
so far as we can ascertain, the federal government, the military, the Ethiopian military, is attacking posts using the Air Force and using its forces from 2 or 3 places. One from the northeastern part of Ethiopia, the southern part of Ethiopia, and the northern part of Ethiopia by way of Eritrea. The idea is to squeeze or to advance to a point where you will literally find these people in a certain area and take out the TPLF regime. Certain idiotic things have been done. One is they have now essentially, the federal government the what you would call the head of the prosecution, or the attorney general, as you would call it, has put up an arrest warrant for 70 of the 70 members of TPLF. So these 70 people in the leadership of the PLF are now have an arrest warrant against them. The party is now deemed illegal. There is a provisional administration set up in Addis, which will go to Tigray once this war is over and form a caretaker administration. And there will be, we're talking assumptions here, and this war will be over so fast that elections will be held in, I'm told, in next year, May to July. And this caretaker administration will stabilize things in Tigray until a new election is held, thereby ending this cycle and having a new government which will have the power to decide on constitution and other matters. Now, reality is different, of course, especially when it comes to conflict. Once you start a war has a mind of its own. So the idea that you will stop it or you will stop actions is uninformed at best and ridiculous at worst. The very idea that you are going to fight remnants of an army has also been found to be untrue, because the war was, I don't know when the end date for the war has been assumed, but it seems this will go on for a while, because the expected victories, if there were victories, have not happened yet, because the fight seems to happen in Tigray. And a very interesting scenario here is that because the Ethiopian army has a standing army and weapons and multiple platforms on the border between Eritrea and Ethiopia, because that is where the next conflagration might happen to Ethiopia. The Tigrayan regime has sent its own forces to subsume all of this, which is heavy weapons, about 100,000 soldiers, as I understand it. And they have turned this entire army set up to fight against Eritrea, should war break out, is now being used to fight within Ethiopia, other Ethiopian forces. And this is manifested through the airstrikes that the Tigrayan regime is doing towards Eritrean airports and airports closer to the central part of Ethiopia. In other words, this is not two guerrilla armies fighting. These are two armies well equipped fighting one another with modern sophisticated weapons. And unfortunately for us, because internet, electricity, and essential services have been cut in the north, information is not available as it should be. What is being declared from the refugees in Sudan is that there have been some signs of ethnic cleansing. There is contrasting reports coming out of a specific place called Maikadra or so, where 200 to 300 people have died or have been assassinated, or rename it, or cleansed. You can use your own terms. And those who have been killed and those who have killed them, there is a murky space there that no one can actually tell us. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have confirmed that there's been an ethnic massacre, but they're not sure who's done it. You hear a lot of boastful statements from both the Ethiopian army and the Tigray regime. But in terms of, and I also got to just learn about this, I should have, but the Ethiopian standing army so far has 135,000 soldiers. The Tigrayan force, with its special militia and special forces and the local militia combined, is about 250,000 soldiers strong. In other words, as soon as these people were purged of their positions in 2018, they have prepared for the inevitable and have trained enough people for soldiers or to become soldiers. And now they have a far more bigger army than the federal government. But the question and the answer still relies on who believes in their aim the most. That's what war is. Any kind of conflict depends on who considers his mission to be the most important. And on the government side, we've been told repeatedly that it's a police action. They are quite upset that the foreign media describes this as a war, a civil war, and not a police action. And to that effect, they have kicked out the Reuters reporter from Addis, and a reporter for the International Crisis Group, an NGO based in Brussels, has also been kicked out. And in terms of the PR front, I don't think it's going the way the federal government wanted. At least that could be said.
Yeah. I think complementary information is given by human rights organizations or NGOs, such as the International Red Cross or the Ethiopian Red Cross Society. And they have also established a missing links hotline so that relatives can go to or call and tell them who they're missing. And they also have been reporting that they have been attacked. Cars of paramedics of the ICRC have been attacked, and that is against the sort of code of war. And yeah, I think in order to sort of get a bit of an overview, I've also started compiling information on a website on a very brief, to get a very brief overview, because right now it feels also, as a Ethiopian myself, overwhelming of what to do and how to support. So in order to have a bit of an overview, I've compiled all the information I have until now, and it's like a crowdsourced project.
Can you share the link? Or?
Yeah, I will share it. It's ethiopialifeline.card with .co. And yeah, that's a way of staying on top of things that are happening, and also where to donate and who to support.
Okay, so where do I find the link? Also, just to maybe.
I've posted it in the chat.
On the YouTube chat.
No, on the Jitsi chat.
Oh,
but I can post.
Here's a chat. Wow, let's have a look at the chat. Okay, I'll have a look at it later. But yeah, that's because I mean for me as an outsider, it's just interesting that there's a war going on, and you really don't, and they really manage to exclude the world. I mean the world watching, and while we are still immersed in Donald Trump tweets, we don't know what's going on. And I mean, just a few weeks ago we had the same with a war in Karabakh, where it was not clear what's happening until suddenly there was kind of almost a defeat declared of the Armenian troops, and so. And
well, there is a comical irony I find here. Whenever the case of the Horn of Africa or the Eastern of Africa is concerned, its name is mentioned when something bad is happening. So civil war, an ethnic cleansing, poverty, or famine. It's the ideal place for the Western world or the Western news platform to look at it and say, oh, how terrible. A friend of mine was describing to me of how terrible it is that to talk about Ethiopia, the journalist you're talking to is based in Nairobi. And this one, I thought we would have had better information because the BBC and the Chinese outlets, CGTN and Al Jazeera, have Ethiopian reporters based in Ethiopia. Some of them I even know personally, who I went to school with. And it was my genuine hope that we would hear about this and this news would be amplified. And I think there are certain things here. The Nagorno-Karabakh, I think, exploded again and again at the outset of Trump being elected as well. Or it may have been going on since, but it was never given much attention. There are certain African countries which took their own, countries where those who were in charge have taken opposition figures in jail on the eve of American elections, thinking that this will not merit a lot more Western media attention. The Ethiopian conflict, as we are looking at it now, has not received as much media traction as I hoped or as I thought. Part of it has to do with how this part of the world was looked at. It was always looked at opaque and amorphous. There is nothing there to look at, is how they thought. And also part, I suspect, of colonial legacy, which is that Kenya has been owned and bought and processed by the English, and therefore they've had their reporters from time immortal there. But Ethiopia is a strange mix of, countries where, while it's English speaking, it's not necessarily English. It doesn't relate in any manner to the English or the French or the Italians or the Americans.
Because
Yeah,
because it has never been colonized.
And the fortune of not being colonized allows you to create an independent spirit, but it is another thing to expect this spirit to be shared by others. And therefore, every time something terrible happens is when you hear of this happened in Somalia, Ethiopia, the South Sudan, Eritrea. And let's face it, had we not got into this now, we've had a relatively stable system of government. And the basket cases of this area were Somalia since 1991, South Sudan for 30, 40 years, which has become a nation of its own, but hasn't fared any better. Eritrea, which has remained in the hands of an authoritarian dictator. And so Ethiopia was the leading light, or so it was hoped, that its prosperity would lead to others to come to terms with themselves and go to a certain coalition of a peaceful economic and political transition.
Like we just said, the revolution in Sudan, and so
exactly. But
what?
Yeah, but revolutions in other places, I don't know, say Latin America, and revolutions in Africa are two different things. Revolutions in Africa tend to succeed barely, if they succeed at all. I mean, I have a specific session I did on my radio show called Revolutions Need Lawyers, where much of what is new should be enshrined in code, and much of the public which fought for these rights should be well aware of the eroding of such rights. But revolutions happen, but they never go anywhere because the old guard finds a way to return. Ethiopia had not a revolution, in my opinion, at least in 2018, but a reshuffle. And that reshuffle, even though it was endorsed by Ethiopians and by the international community to the point that the prime minister winning the Nobel Peace Prize for making peace with Ethiopia and Eritrea, on the ground, there is no platform, there is no legislative paper that tells you the future relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. So far, we have seen in the past 2 years is the good friendship between the leader of Ethiopia and the leader of Eritrea. And two people, just because they're simpatico, does not mean anything will come out that has a future in it, in a way.
I mean, this was also my question before, if maybe this kind of new coalition or new friendship between Ahmed and the leader of Eritrea has also to do something with the TPLF, because
it does.
both can take the TPLF from power, which, while the TPLF, which is at the border with Eritrea, and as I understood, Eritreans also are often speaking Tigrayan or ethnic Tigrayan, so there's another conflict going on since the last, I don't know, 30 years or longer, and so this conflict maybe was ended to start another one. I mean, this is just, I don't know,
That's a very good observation. But you have to remember this. What I call this reshuffle that led to Abiy Ahmed and his people coming to power happened before. In decisions that were made while they were in a coalition, some of those who are now in retirement have said that the decision to normalize relations with Eritrea was done together. It is not the prime individual decision making of Abiy Ahmed. Rather, it was as a coalition decided upon that the past 20 years of isolating Eritrea has not helped.
Okay, so this
has
was
not brought
also
fruits.
done by the TPLF.
Yeah, but here is the deal, though. They decided as a coalition that peace should be pursued. When their coalition fell apart, those two leaders met, and much of what was supposed to be, if you remember, when this peace was declared, the country went to a sort of euphoric joy, essentially, because it was something on the back of a lot of people's worries that another conflagration might happen. So the first and second meetings between Abiy and Prime Minister Abiy and President Isaias was looked at kindly by the Tigrayans themselves as well, in the hopes that this will be institutionalized. The suspicion arrived when Abiy flies to Asmara and Isaias flies to Addis, but the border in which these two people live in, none of these leaders have come and met in such places. Isaias has not been invited to Tigray and allowed to outline his speech, and he wouldn't do so because he is a characteristically bitter enemy of the TPLF, historically. Because, as one of the retired generals put it, such was the friendship after the independence of Eritrea. Such was the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea after independence, that Eritreans and Ethiopians basically were one country with a semi-autonomous border in between. In other words, when the game was up, those who made the game up and those who actually fought in the military to destroy much of the Eritrean army are Tigrayans and the TPLF. So there is bitter enmity that still exists between these people, and the suspicion of the TPLF that these two are still talking to one another without talking to the rest of the public is for a sinister purpose, to make sure that they're going to fight Tigray, corner TPLF, and destroy it. And that suspicion they could be forgiven for, because Isaias has fought with everybody else that he was friends with, and they did not respect. They did not. That suspicion is a legitimate suspicion as well. And this suspicion, we have to. I mean, this is the most troublesome of this war, is the information that comes. You cannot just verify it. You hear stories of Ethiopian army going by afar to Eritrea so that it could do what you call a rearguard action. So if the battle lines are between North Ethiopia and South Ethiopia, the rearguard from Eritrea is being attacked by Ethiopian soldiers going through Eritrea as well. So if this is true, then this confirms the suspicion that the TPLF has, and perhaps even give it legitimacy in the space that it's fighting on. As for Eritrea and Eritreans, the other interesting story is there are 200,000 refugees from Eritrea living in Tigray as well. Okay? If this system goes to continue to be, if this cordial relationship between Abiy and Isaias are to be true, are we going to give these people back to Eritrea, knowing full well the Eritreans' human rights record? That's a question. There is 30,000 refugees in Sudan already. The UNHCR tells us that it will be 200,000 within a couple of days or weeks. Add to that another 200,000. My assumption is Eritrean people, and you'll have a full-blown catastrophe there. But the irony there that I would like to say is, but to say this to the Ethiopian intelligentsia is to have yourself murdered in a court of public opinion. Because, again, the Addis elite fails to understand that this police action, what is, they use this term police action or law and order. You can't have a law and order operation run when you have 250,000 soldiers, 3 armies, an air force, and drones striking a specific region. So either the terminology is wrong or what you're doing is wrong. And so far, the terminology is quite inadequate. And these assumptions in which they will win easy in Tigray and then administer, it's marks of what Bush did in Iraq, in a way. And let's say his government is run by far more intelligent people than, let's say, the current regime in Ethiopia. The idea that you will go to Iraq, you will be greeted as liberators, the oil will pay for the war, and so, clearly has not happened, because military leaders in Ethiopia and the political leaders in Ethiopia, I assume, are either have a false assumption of how this is going to end, or they have a false assumption of how it was going to go in the first place when they planned it. And I highly, highly, highly doubt the way they think it's going to go. I don't think they're going to subjugate these people, put up a temporary leadership that is sent from Addis, and then run the country for a while until a new election is run. Because even if there was a new elections, you have essentially cut cables to make sure that this place is de facto unconnected in terms of power, in terms of internet connectivity, in terms of essential services that they, as citizens of a country, they deserve. You have cut this, and you're telling them that you're doing them a favor. I don't think the public will say it this way. And the end result of it will be interesting to see. Now, the biggest thing that's feared by the United Nations and what frightens, I suspect, the European Union is, it's bad enough that they had this many refugees from Syria. The next wave of it might actually be from Ethiopia. And so you see this unmistakable head in the sand, like the ostrich that buries its head in the sand, way of looking at this. And I dare say that unless they, by some way, intervene in this conflict, when this conflict is done and dusted with, there might be a country that is radically different from what it is now.
But so maybe also a question to both of you: what might be the outlooks? I mean, what might be kind of the best possible result, and what might be the worst possible result? I mean, I guess
That's a very good question.
To try to come to terms, but yeah, maybe just ideas of what can happen. Yeah, Jessica, maybe.
I don't think. Are you listening to her?
Sorry, I'd muted myself. Yeah, I think territorial autonomy is something I personally can't imagine, but the past few days have been entertaining the idea of what would it all look like if we would assume that this would follow the example or the analogy of Yugoslavia, and there would be succession, yeah, I think it will. It's a possibility that fragmentation could happen. I'm not quite sure how sustainable that is, because ethnicity, as so many other concepts, are constructs, and so they're fragile, and it's very tricky to identity politics as such is always tricky. And so I think the contestation of who identifies as Ethiopian or who identifies as Tigray, Oromo, or Amhara, or so on, is one that could be maybe critically engaged in. But right now, I think it's still very, very tense, because a lot of people are poor and hungry and have been fighting wars, and a lot of people came of age in this atmosphere. So it's quite. I think it will. My foreboding is that it's going to get worse for some time, and then it's going to have some kind of peace deal.
I personally, so let's start from the worst. What is assumed to be a state collapse. I personally think that won't happen, because a great example is set by Eritrea, who seceded from the Ethiopian Federation 30 years ago, but went the way of North Korea. There are certain lessons learned by the Ethiopian elite, including the Tigrayan elite, I think, which is why the conversation so far has been gone, at least the majority of it, of how awful this administration, the current administration, is. Not necessarily that we've had enough with these people would go. There is a certain voices among the elites that said we've had enough of these people, okay? And there is great anger and resentment by, I'm guessing, the public of being being attacked for the sake of a bit of elites, or that an entire government army was sent to pacify Tigray. There might be resentment there. Complete collapse as a state like Yugoslavia, at this moment at least, I don't see it happening. While that is the case, I also think that there might, even if this is done, and even if there is a parliament, I don't think there will be significant constitutional change that leads this country to citizen-based constitutional amendments. What I think will add is specific clauses, I suppose, in which in majority minority states, minorities will be given extra rights or protections, or would be able to administer their own zone, like in a zone within a state, sort of an arrangement could be made, so that what has happened in Oromia and in Benishangul Gumuz might not happen. I suspect the move towards changing the constitution to having citizen-based elements will cause some resentments to the status quo or the powers that be. And it might not be so hard to imagine another guerrilla or civilian opposition to what will change, if it ever changes. As for the suffering happening in Tigray, there is no other way of putting it. It will continue to be a catastrophe because it's been now 3 weeks where banks, telecoms, and everything else closed. And this is in a region that is mostly affected with drought. About several millions of these people who live in rural areas live with what's called a safety net program, where international donor-based money from the United Nations is given for people to purchase their good, which in return is like a food for work programs. That's what the safety net program is. That money has been stopped a week before the war has stopped. The war is gone now through its second week, going to its third. And these 20,000 people who are fleeing to Sudan, even though the federal government says it's prepared to receive them, it hasn't showed what kind of policy they will apply to help them reconstitute, or how kind of safe zones they've created for them so that they won't be ethnically cleansed. So I expect this tragedy to continue. The 200,000 people who are to be kept in Sudan, it might or might not be more, I think, seeing this conflict is not going to end anytime soon. And a certain professor's idea of this confederation system being even looser, I see that as an option as well. Now, the TPLF has put it as a precondition that if they are to sit down and talk about the future of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed should not be in charge. That's what they've clearly stated. In other words, we'll be good with anybody else, but Abiy is the guy who ordered a military regime to fight us, who's cut off our services, our budgets, our political rights have been curtailed, our civilian rights have been curtailed. Bombings in civilian-led areas is done by the current regime. So I've heard of attempts to negotiation between the North, as in the TPLF-led regime, and the federal government, going to the lines of, yeah, but we would need Abiy to step out. But we'll see. This situation is so fluid. If it goes on the way it goes on, some have also entertained the idea of Tigray joining Eritrea as a country, thereby creating a Tigrayan bloc of a nation which has at least one common language and denominator. And but I for myself will not see it, because so long as Isaias Afwerki and his cronies are in charge, and so long as they have this hatred of TPLF, that will not happen. So I don't see, at least for the moment, the state collapse happening. But so fluid is the situation, one cannot bet on anything at the moment.
So before that, you were talking about the Unitarian perspective of Abiy Ahmed, so that he is kind of thinking about more a centralized country which is less based on ethnicities, ideally. So how do you think this could become reality, or is it, or what?
This will define the Ethiopian state for a very long time to come. In other words, the very definition of, so here's, I mean, there are some things to be said. So the citizen-based or the Unitarian system assumes that we are all equal citizens enfranchised by the Constitution, life, liberty, and so and so, and that we should not be harassed or put in jail because we believe something entirely different from another person. In other words, the measure of the yardstick of measurement for this will be how you are judged as a citizen, not as a block. But there was an idea where a professor once explained it. This was a temporary situation where this blocks federal states. Remember, they are federal states in one of the poorest countries on the planet. As soon as economic development catches up, and as soon